click forward. I think I've frozen. Oh, there we are. I did freeze and now I've gone too far. So the first thing is just housekeeping, of course. I did already say that about the chat. So just make sure when you're engaging in the chat that it says all panelists and attendees. That would be great. We've got a small group today, and I'm really happy for like actual conversation. So if you'd like to, if you have a microphone and you'd like to unmute it, Erin's happy to allow that setting to run in the background there for us. And so when we get to the conversation, yeah, please do. If you're ready for a bit of a chat about teaching and learning, you can unmute and we can go.
Yeah, I'll just set that up now so you'll be able to do that. Maybe just if you have something to say, pop your hand up so we can, so we know when people want to talk, and I'll monitor that.
Thank you very much, Erin. A reminder, if you are in New South Wales and you're using this for accredited PT, that there needs to be some sort of interaction. That we'll have plenty of questions thrown your way, and you don't even need to wait for a question necessarily. Feel free to throw in thoughts or opinions as we go through. And we've got Erin moderating and sort of having a read through. She'll make sure we don't miss anything that's relevant. We've already talked about the chat and the QA, so that's okay. And I suppose the key housekeeping point from Cherie and I is we have a tendency to, well, we get deep into conversation and one thing leads to another, and before you know it, the hour's gone. We really want to hit the things that we say we're going to hit, which is, here we are. We really want to be able to hit this. This is what you signed up for. And please feel free to throw into the chat if you feel like we need to move on and get cracking again if we get distracted. It's a good trait of ours, but it's also, you know, time restrictions can be an imposition. So we said we would today do this, discuss common misconceptions about primary and high school experience, show how continuous data across a child's learning journey can remove these boundaries and contribute to fostering strong reciprocal partnerships that return the focus to the individual student. So that's our goal. That's what you've signed up for today. We're really glad that you're here and that you've got an interest in this, and you may be thinking about this, you may have begun this journey, or you may be well into it. So we're all experts here in something in some way. And so we're not saying that we know everything. We're really keen to hear thoughts and opinions from the audience as well. I'll just do a quick introduction. I suppose I'll start. I'll talk about my very long and dear friend, Cherie Connors. She's in the ACT, and she's probably a rare breed. She not only you know, is an excellent teacher, but she walks the walk in every regard when it comes to being a lifelong learner. I've seen her create this love of learning in, you know, all her students, but not only her students, also with the teachers that she works with. So, and that's a really tremendous thing. And I think it's something that we want to aspire to have a lot of in our education system. And she's been a real anchor for me over the years. She's always reminding me what it is that I have and what I can do and what I can offer and bring to the table. And I think she really has that effect on all people, and that is really empowering. So I hope you feel empowered after being in this webinar with Cherie today.
Oh, thanks, Erin. That's lovely. And I'm going to introduce Erin, and well, there's lots of things about Erin, but every time we're in the professional conversations, it's always about learners and their learning. The first time I met Erin, I was inspired by her frighteningly deep knowledge of mathematics content, but so inspired by how she is able to bring it together through conceptualization and developing activities for students and teachers so that they can conceptualize and actually fall in love with numbers. So that passion that you bring to that, Erin, has always been really inspiring. There's always been, there's also this element of posing that sort of challenging question, which is where I've felt, I think for me, it's been great growing in our relationship, because I've always been so interested and inspired by kids and learning, and every child can learn no matter what, and we can never give up, and loving those conversations with Erin because she's the same, but then she sort of takes me deeper with those really deep questions. So that sort of, you know, you've always been that real critical friend that's kind of driven me further than where I thought I could go. And not to mention that creativity and innovation. You know, the book that Ken Robinson wrote about schools kill creativity. You know, I really feel like, you know, you've brought that out, and I've had to, you know, I've gone into so many meetings and so many conversations where I have been able to engage and then take people deeper because of my conversations with you. So, and also your love for numbers, like your belief that every single child can learn and every child's smart and every teacher's smart, and let's just do this and make it awesome. So thank you.
So I suppose what you get out of that is a little insight into our respective passions for education and how over the years we've worked together and bounced off each other, and that working relationship extends decades now. So
not in cafes anymore though. Like I miss the Tilly's catch up. So if anyone's ever been to the ACT and the Tilly's Cafe, that's where Erin and I spent many hours over coffee talking about mathematics.
Yeah, mathematics learning.
And learning.
Oh, I've missed a slide. Let's go back. So I've got a quick poll. I know some people, when they were early, they were telling us whereabouts they're from, but I'd like to specifically just get to a bit of a quick indication about whether we've got a primary audience, a high school audience, maybe a middle school. So maybe you're, you know, in a specific setting that looks at middle school will be like 5 to 8, or maybe you're outside of that, you'd choose others. So maybe like TAFE, or maybe you do long distance learning or university or something like that. Oh, there's no other there this time. If you are another, you can throw it in the chat for us. That'd be fine.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to update after last time, but that's okay. So it looks like, again, we've got middle school, a few middle school teachers and mostly high school teachers. And then, yes, Cassie, I was going to say, across the years of there.
So I suppose then to round that out, my background has been, I was high school trained, and then I did some work for the department, which offered me the great privilege of working with many, many primary school teachers. I did that with their kids in their classrooms. So I've got experience, you know, through primary school, through high school. Canberra does senior secondary school, so they've got like years 11 and 12. So I taught in college for a number of years there. And also I've done a lot of work teaching pre-service teachers at university. So I kind of covered the gamut there. Cherie?
So I've a primary trained teacher, worked in the secondary school as well as primary, P to 10. Lots of work in transitions from preschool to kindy, from year 6 to year 7, and then of course from year 10 into our college system. So here in the ACT we have separate, it's not 7 to 12, it's 7 to 10, and then separate college for 11 and 12.
Thank you, Sharon and Kerry, for throwing your responses into the chat there. We're going to start with, what does this school think is important? And you can feel free to unmute your mic and just let us know, or you can throw it into the chat, that's okay. What I'm thinking here is, you know, what is the image that your school is promoting? Like, what is that real important thing that they're holding to high regard?
Yeah, Shamsi, go for it.
My school promotes personal best.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah, stage not age, that's lovely. That's a real tailoring to personalise learning in some way. Performing arts for Cass. Any other thoughts? Yeah, academic excellence. Yeah, that's lovely. Oh, I like that. Nobody gets lost. That's great.
Nobody goes missing.
Yeah. So if you had to summarise the theme that's coming through those responses there, I think we'd say it's, you know, the thing that a school and probably rightly so, holds true to type is something to do with education and learning, all the learners. What's interesting is, and I'll just talk about it on this slide now, is if we ask the kids, their answers actually quite different. So there's there was a study in Victoria that showed that when they asked high school students, actually it was across the board, primary and high school students, that most of the students' answers, like over 75%, were something along the lines of, my school thinks behaviour is important. My school thinks uniform or their reputation is important. And, you know, words related to education and learning didn't sort of feature. So it's kind of a shame, isn't it? It's a bit of a missed opportunity. And this is our sort of first real introduction into how important conversations are. You know, what is being deemed important by the student is being driven by the conversations that they're part of at that school. So if the conversations that the students are not part of don't relate to learning, but more so relate to, you're out of uniform, you're doing the wrong thing, behaviour management types of conversations, then we've kind of misled them, I think, in some way as to what the purpose of them being there is. So I suppose, yeah, that's just our little segue into, you know, how important communication is, and to make sure that we're involving the learners themselves in these conversations. So here we've got another conversation for you. So if we want to think about the perceptions of one sector looking at the other, so either from the high school to the primary school or from the primary school to the high school, what sort of are the perceptions of what's happening in the other sector? So some thoughts around that would be, you know, if you want to think about other ways to think about this sort of question that I'm asking you is, you know, what is it that the primary school teachers say about high school, or vice versa? What do the high school kids think about the primary school, or what is the community perception about each of these areas? Thanks, Jodie, for kicking us off in the chat. So primary education is the foundation for learning, and that is really key. In fact, research shows that that's what the community perceives primary education to be, foundations. Yeah, true, Cass. Old child in primary school. And I'll speak to it a bit later, but that's a big focus of the university training that's given to primary school teachers.
I'd be interested too for all the high school teachers there, what you think perceptions are from primary teachers towards you as well.
A place where students learn to learn.
Most primary teachers were not fans of maths when they were at school.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not even a perception. I've taught hundreds of pre-service primary school teachers, and you know, if you were just going to look at the statistics and the data, you would say that is a true statement. They were not fans, and they don't particularly like it, nor enjoy or are good at it. And that's self-perceptions. There's a lot of research about perceptions of primary school teachers regarding their own mathematics competency.
Also, your comment there too, Tony, about the primary school providing more tinkering and collaborative learning from high school. Definitely a bit of a perception there.
So in my experience, so I said I've done some work with primary school teachers. Something that I heard a lot, like almost too much from year 5, 6 teachers was, well, we have to get the kids ready for high school. We have to get them ready. It's like, well, ready for what? Like, what are you getting them ready for? And how is that readiness any different to how you might get a year 4 student ready for year 5? So when you unpack that, because it's actually, I don't want to belittle that feeling. It did create a fair amount of anxiety for year 6 teachers. I've got to get them ready. They had this extra pressure about what they could do to make sure that their kids were ready. When we unpacked that a bit, we got to things like, well, you know, I have to make sure I they have to do more from the textbook. They have to get used to doing more homework. I have to go faster because the pace is like they move at a faster pace in high school. I can't use manipulatives anymore. So they had quite grand sweeping statements, but these were really strong belief statements that they held about what they needed to do. But I really feel like that the best thing that they could do as a year 6 teacher who's primary trained, who's got an exceptional amount of pedagogical training, is to do what they would ordinarily do for year 3, 4 and 5, which is to, do their conceptual approach, use their manipulatives and to keep doing good teaching. To alter the way that they do that, to prepare for something that is really just their perception of what high school is, can be a bit misleading. Do you have any thoughts about either direction there, Cherie?
Yeah, I think there's a note in the chat box there by Kerry around how to get them ready if they don't know what they need. Thanks for that comment, Kerry, because that's exactly where and why I moved from the primary to the secondary sector. So I taught specialist maths in the primary school to begin with, but then I moved into the 5-6 class and had a couple of years there. And then I too was saying that, I need to get these kids ready for high school. And because I was working in a cluster of schools that was really connected and collaborative in their development of aligned frameworks for learning and all those types of things, fantastic transition programs. I mean, transition wasn't even a thing with that cluster. Transition was a way of being for us. And so I had an opportunity to move to the secondary school and work with the year 7 students. So I took my year 6s across with me. And my purpose for doing that was to go over and have a look what was happening there so I could come back and be a better primary school teacher in that preparation. But of course, once I got there, I ended up staying in the sector for about a good 10 to 12 years. And it was because I was so inspired by I think, first of all, the knowledge, the content knowledge, obviously the depth of knowledge of the staff members that I've worked with. But I also really enjoyed what I was able to bring and share with them around collaborative learning and grouping and using cooperative learning strategies to unpack math texts or science texts and things like that. So I think that, there's those sort of perceptions, I think, have become, and those comments have kind of become a norm, but it's because people don't really know what it looks like. It's sort of like the dark side. What's on the dark side? Primary looking at high and high looking at primary. And it's not unless we've got some really great collaborative, sites working together with those students that are going through to those high schools that we can really get some good traction there.
Yeah, I think Brett's got a good point there, that it's really that from both sides, what you just said too, Cherie, that it's really not knowing what's done on the other side. You've had that opportunity to move from one to the other, so you've been able to take everything that was good and inject it into the other and see from the other side as well. And I don't think that's that's certainly not a criticism or a fault of any particular, like, it's not a personal thing. It's just, and one point I want to make is it is specifically about the way that we're trained. So high school teachers, I'll start with them. So normally, I'll make some broad sweeping statements, generalizations. Generally, a high school teacher will end up with a high school teaching degree, having come from, they might have another degree, and then they'll do an add-on like a diploma of education or a master's of education, and they'll be able to then teach in a high school. The coined term for that is like a subject matter expert, not my language, but that is sort of what they're training them to be. They want them to be really knowledgeable in the field that they'll be teaching, and their degrees focus, apart from the normal things like diversity and inclusion and special education, but also really focused on that pedagogical content knowledge for that subject area. And we flip the coin and we look at primary teacher training across Australia, and typically that is a sort of like a 4-year degree program, and they do a lot of pedagogical focus. There's a lot of talk about the student as a whole. It's very holistic. The student is the center of the learning, and it's not like they'll cover individual subjects. Certainly when I was teaching the maths component of that, but the focus is broadly speaking about how to teach young children, and they've got great strategies for that. But they might actually therefore lack then that sort of subject matter expertise when it comes to specific things like mathematics. And there's a lot of research that shows that is actually the case. So the teacher training creates this divide. And it's only, I suppose, if people sort of step outside and make opportunities for themselves in that area that they could bridge that. One other area for the divide is that lack of contact, and I won't delve into that, but it's been pretty clear with the comments that we've had that people would like that understanding, but they haven't necessarily had that opportunity, and it's not necessarily created. It's not a common conversation to have, and it's not a common activity for schools to run. At high schools and primary schools, it's not very common for them to say, oh, we're just having, you know, the high school teachers down for a chat this afternoon, you know, to make those connections. It sort of doesn't happen. And we're all busy. There's lots of reasons for it. We don't need to go into that. And then this was brought up earlier too, that the sectors are seen to do different things. You know, the primary school sector is sort of seen to be that foundational sort of aspect of things, whereas the high school sector is sort of seen as a community perception, you know, which means the parents and therefore the students, they sort of, that sector is more seen to be around preparation for employment. And so with that divide about how they do different things, there's also that layer of, well, how do you do those things that you're meant to be doing? And but you know, it's no wonder that things look different. And thank you, Glenn. Yeah, it's an insight, isn't it? Like that we sort of haven't had that opportunity to. But Sheree and I are in a bit different situation there. We've both had these opportunities. We've both done work with clusters of schools that involve primary and high schools, and we've had these sort of cross sector communication.
I had a conversation with a learning and teaching coach here at the Australian National University, and that was just provoked because of an email that came through, and I was really interested in her job description because I was a learning and teaching coach at the time at a P10 school. And so I contacted her and said, hey, I'm really interested in what do you do at the university? And her and I met for coffee, and it was such a fantastic conversation. I'll never forget it, because she was working in the same vein that I was around, or with the professors and the lecturers and the tutors, around making sure that their presentations were about their learners and how they learn, and not so much about the content. Well, we're still about the content, but focusing more on their pedagogical practice. And he was saying, what she said that their comments were, well, what are they doing in the colleges? We've got to prepare these people for the workforce. And of course, we all know what the workforce is saying is, what are they doing at the universities? Because they're not ready for that. So I think that there's this, I don't know, it's just like it just seems to be people fear these transitions, and yet I think everyone does a good job in their own way, but of course we can always do things better, can't we?
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly been guilty of that. I've had pre-service teachers that have come to me, and I've been their mentor teacher, and I'm in a school, and I've had that thought. I've gone home to my partner and exasperated, like, what are they doing? Like, how are they in their third year and they don't know this bit yet? Like, and so I'm not saying, well, sorry, that's typical Zoom in distraction, isn't it? It's, I'm not saying that, we're better than that, and I don't say that. I've had those thoughts. It's just really about being conscious about, okay, they're not helpful conversations and they're not helpful thoughts. What I need to do is reframe that conversation and those thoughts to be something that can be constructive. So, a year 7 teacher, what are they doing down there? And a mentor teacher saying, why is the university sending me these students? Like, they're not helpful. We need to reframe that. So, and then of course data. So the lack of true data that sort of is really owned by the student and travels with the student and paints the story about where the student is at in that whole learning sequence, if you like, often doesn't exist in a meaningful way. So that contributes to this divide quite significantly. That's a good lead into the next slide, actually. So what types of data do you have on your students? So you can throw that into the chat or unmute and let us know. If I frame that a bit more for you, let's think about specifically, you know, if you've got new students, either that's through the year or at the beginning of the year, what sort of data do you have?
I think just while everyone's typing there, Sharon just made a really good point too about how much you learn on the ground when you've left uni as well. It's a really good point.
Oh, absolutely.
Am I the only nerd that actually goes back to my textbooks even after 15, 20 years?
I've got a confession. What I've done with all of my math textbooks, for example, so I did a pure maths degree, and I have this beautiful bookcase of all these amazing math texts. You know, math texts are big and chunky and hard covered, and so now they're my flower presses.
Jodie goes back to the textbooks. Yay, Jodie!
Oh, hold on a second.
So interesting types of data coming through: NAPLAN, school and pre-testing and pre and post testing created by teachers, and Mathspace diagnostics there. And yeah, a lot of NAPLAN responses coming
Unfortunately, typically for summative assessments in high school.
Yeah.
And then Glenn mentioning that we only get data on students with intellectual or other problems as well. Yeah, so that's at the end. That's a good point too. And sorry.
It's just worth really reflecting on that when you're accessing that data. I mean, we're limited to good data. And you will, and it makes sense to look at whatever you've got, because surely some data is better than none. But it's really important to ask yourself that question every time you're looking at some data. Is this sort of holistic? Does it paint a full picture, or was it a snapshot in time? And then you can put how much you weight that data into perspective. So I suppose if you are, we should have asked that question actually, if you were a Mathspace user or not. It gives us a bit of a feel. But if you do currently use Mathspace, then of course the data that's in there about the student does paint a much broader picture about their mathematics. It can highlight where they're strong, what sort of topic areas are their strengths, but also maybe where they've got some sort of gaps in their understanding. So what do you think, Cherie? Do you want to skip this one or have a quick chat about this?
I think we've already covered a bit of that, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just do a time check. Oh, there we are. Yeah, I reckon I'll quickly zip over this one. This slide, I just wanted to briefly talk about the practical things that happen on a transition. And I'm going to just talk about transition here because it's an opportunity to talk to other schools. So, I mean, there are lots of conversations that are really important. The conversations with the learners, conversations with your teaching partners within your school, conversations then outside the school. And so the outside the school can involve your parent community, and it can also involve other schools. So it could be maybe the feeder schools that go to you or come to you. Could just be other schools in your area. Maybe you're a Catholic school and you've got a public school that's just 2 streets away. Like, don't let those divides stop you from having conversations. So there are some practical things that happen in a transition year that can provide an opportunity to have conversations and to get that dialogue flowing. So obviously, well, actually there's some research that shows that these things cause considerable anxiety to students when they do the transition. And if these things are not handled well, then that anxiety can actually lead to a reluctance to wanting to turn up to school because of fear of, being seen to not be able to do these things like everyone else has magically been able to handle it. So things like tables, use and interact with maps, especially if the building is a 2-story building or multi-story level, it's really difficult. Young students are not skilled in map and timetable reading. The ability to think abstractly and symbolically, is not highly developed at 11, 12 years of age. Like, these are younger minds. So in fact, like, timetables doesn't even appear in the curriculum until, you know, in depth that they need to understand a high school table until year 8, once they've already done a year and a bit of it. So like we need to be mindful of that. And also being able to move from one room to the other. So these practical things provide an opportunity to have conversations, which is, you know, one of the real key points here about developing a community. So you can use the fact that if you're in year 6 or you've got a year 6 class, you can use these things as an opportunity to say to your local high school, I'd like to bring up a group of kids. I'd like to bring up 5 kids every Friday for all of term 3 and 4. You know, I want to talk about these practical things that they need to know how to do. There's some good benefits from that. The students will feel better prepared. They'll be familiar with the school and the place and some of the faces, but it's also opening the door to having conversations. With the amount of teachers that I've had in rooms doing PDs, and especially face-to-face ones, but you know, if we're working on projects or all different sorts of things, it doesn't take long for teachers in a room to start talking about teaching and learning. So all you need to do is get yourself in the room. That's kind of the point of this slide, is to find an opportunity to do that. And same too from the high school down. You know, you've got students that are going to come to you, you know, provide yourself the availability for them to come up or to go down and say, hey, I just thought I'd bring down an example of our timetable. Let's just talk about it with the kids. Like, there's opportunities there. So learning how to learn is a really key thing with regards to, you know, it's like it's a phrase that's thrown around a lot. But the idea about learning how to learn is really fundamental to this idea of developing a community of learning. Because when in this community, you want to be having conversations about learning, and you need to know what you all mean and what you all do and what you all say about that. So we thought we'd start with some stories.
So the Harrison Middle School story, if I can sort of try and box that for you, we were a P-10 school, and it was a brand new school, and I arrived when our first year 7s moved into the year 7 space, and I was there to sort of develop and lead the mathematics. So it's a multi-age school. So we had year 7 and 8 groupings and year 9 and 10 groupings. And the end scenario, so after 3 years of working with the maths team, we had 4 classes walking into one space with 4 teachers, but no teacher actually owned a class or a group of students. We all owned all of the students. And so during that 3-year period, there was a real shift, not only in my practice, but in the whole team's practice. Because I remember when I first walked in, and you know, the principal said, oh, it's multi-aged and you'll have a 7-8 group, and you know, you'll need you to lead this and da-da-da. And I was like, and I looked at the team when I met with them for the first time. I said, how do we do this? But we're all asking the same question. So we actually all just went off and did our own thing. But then we came back and we had these really regular, like weekly conversations in our meetings about learning based on the data that was coming to us. And eventually that led to us finding Mathspace after trialling and doing some action research on quite a few other packages to see if they were actually having an impact on student learning. And the outcome of that was that it was the only school in our area to show growth in mathematics from 7 to 9. So we managed to do that. And then those students, when they went to Gungahlin College, the group of Harrison students that graduated, they graduated with the highest ATARs out of all the students that ended up going to that college. So the work that we did in that space, because we were learners at the same time as our students, and there was just constant feedback loops set up and discussion forums happening. And the shift in the practice was not so much standing up the front and teaching, but masterclasses were running, and there were collaborative spaces developed, and then there was an independent space developed, and we had a help desk. But all of that only evolved because of the team evolved it with the input from the learners. Lots of explicit teaching around learning behaviour and how to learn. And that was the shift in our practice. I was teaching less mathematics content we were doing more preparation for the kids before they came into the space, because the feedback was coming to them in real time through Mathspace, obviously. That was just such one of the key elements that helped us to sort of drive that space even deeper. And yeah.
Can I ask you, Shruti, did the because something that you just mentioned then, how you guys as a teaching staff were also learning at the same time, would you say that you were learning how the students learn, or you were learning how to teach differently? Are they different things?
Yeah, we were learning, I think, how to teach differently. Definitely. I suppose if I could give one example of the shifts, because, you know, you get some people sort of jump on board really quickly, even though we didn't really know where we were going. Like, we didn't know what our space was going to look like in the end. All that I knew was that we had groups, you know, 4 classes of year 7, 8 students. We were in this incredibly beautifully new building, new public school here in Canberra, with, you know, 4 glass classroom doors, sliding doors coming out into big open spaces with the great furniture and all the rest of it. One teacher that joined the space in the second year of us in development, he, you know, got his class and went into his glass classroom and closed the door and you know, continued to do the teaching. And he was a primary trained teacher who'd come up into the year 7, 8 area. And it wasn't until it was his turn to actually read the discussion forum, because we used to pose questions to the students after we'd sort of changed things in the space. And obviously the change was informed by data. And it wasn't until he read that discussion forum and read the feedback from the students, and when he finished the session that day, because that was during the learning time, like he was off answering all the discussion forum questions while we were off doing a masterclass or, you know, supporting the collaborative group. He came up to me at the end and he said, "Connors," he said, "they really love it. And they're all like talking about mathematics in this forum, like they're talking about their mistakes and then how they've learnt something new." And I said, "That's right." And I said, "and we want to get that into those blogs," because we're starting to move into developing blogs at that stage. And that was just the shift. Like, the door in his classroom came open, and all of a sudden all of his kids were out, because it kind of felt like in the beginning the kids were sort of looking out going, "Oh, all the other kids are out there collaborating and being innovative and, you know, airdropping their presentations to the screens here." And all of a sudden they were allowed out. But obviously we supported that and respected that and accepted that, because that's where he was at as a teacher. And the work that he was doing in that classroom was obviously brilliant as well, you know. And so, yeah, it's just a really lovely story. And of course, we still keep in touch and often giggle about that moment.
Yeah. It's, I mean, for him, the door open for that conversation was to read the student.
That's right. And so he's gone into new settings. And of course, he's kind of contacted me at different times and said, "Oh, Connors, I feel like I'm back in the dark days. Like, you know, I have to have these challenging conversations." And he said, so he's got, you know, his classroom set up flexibly, and then that blends off to his team teacher. And, you know, I guess that's how we share our practice and what works. And what matters is what actually works as far as the kids and getting that extra year's growth of learning. So, yeah, good times.
My story is more in a different setting. So one of the last teaching schools positions that I had before I came to work at Mathspace was that I was the head of faculty at 11-12 school in Canberra called Hawker College. And I was hired specifically because I had a vision about something that we should do in education, and that was basically to get rid of classrooms. So we went in, we took out the classrooms, we took 500 students in 11 and 12 off the timetable. They had to turn up in some of their offlines. They had to choose when they come. We had personalised instruction across all of the 500 students across 10 different types of subjects of mathematics they could be doing in 11 and 12. You know, it was big change. So I worked with the teachers for a while first, and we worked on using digital technologies, and that was, you know, a slow road that took 3 years actually. And then came the transition to this larger shift for instruction at the school. And that was faced with a lot of concern from students who had been in, you know, who had just done 10 years of traditional instruction, and they turned up to year 11 and this looks different. They had concerns like, but, you know, I can't learn like this. And so we had to have instructions around, well, what's learning and how do you know how you're learning? The parent community was quite frightened, you know, well, because of the same thing. They had this perception about, well, what is learning? How do I, you know, and if you're challenging that, then that can be super scary. I'm just, excuse me a second, just finding a research study. So here it is. There's some research done, and this was a South Australian research, so this Australian, which is great. It's a research paper called Possibilities and Paradoxes. It is a really great paper, actually. It just screamed at me when I read it because of this particular line. I just want to read it. Excuse me a second for reading. The status quo represents the conditions under which they have been successful. They might not be as successful under different circumstances. So if children have a lot invested in their support of the status quo, so do their parents. And, you know, the model of the rigidly streamed, strictly disciplinarian school and the parents' responses urged their high schools to adopt is a model of education traditionally and historically associated with success. And so when you challenge how that schooling looks, you're challenging that their students may not be successful. And that's what this paper talks about in terms of challenging the status quo. And this was a more recent paper to when I was doing this. I wish I had this opportunity to read this paper back then, but it was really around being able to have conversations about, well, how do you know, and challenging that status quo, and how do you know how you learn? So that's where we sort of need to talk about how do you know how you learn, and how can you learn, in our particular case, mathematics well. So we have some ideas about what learning how to learn means. Obviously, it's something about preparing the students in a more rich and holistic way. What we're meaning here is not, you know, for high school or for university or to be a doctor or to be an administrative assistant. It's to prepare them, excuse me, for what's next. Just to prepare them in a rich and holistic way.
Jodie just put beautifully, for life.
Yeah, perfect. Just prepare them. Like, we don't know, and we can't make assumptions about that. So these are conversations that we need to have. Things about these sorts of ideas, like how to access knowledge, communicate learning. You know, we do. I mean, as much as I hate it, don't get me started on high stakes testing, but we have it. You know, they do need to know how to do that. Need to know how to self-manage time. Like, these are all specific sort of conversations I can remember having with parents and students and teachers through this change process. And it was really, really important. It was an important part of learning, not just the mathematics, but they had to learn how to learn. So there's another research too that points out, let's see if I can find that one for you. I'll come to it later. But certainly it points out that teaching students how to learn, specifically through that year 5, 6 area, prepares them better for high school than anything else that was done through that research study, including transition, use of textbooks, all those sorts of more traditional things. So teaching them how to learn made them feel more prepared, and then they were more successful, regardless of their academic ability. They were just more successful. You got any comments on that side? I've seemed to have taken over talking about learning, Cherie.
Oh, look, no, Erin, I think that you've really wrapped that up beautifully. I noticed that in the chat earlier on, there was, when we asked about the school's focus, a couple of people had mentioned that their school's drive was learning how to learn. You know, we'd be really welcoming and interested if you are willing to turn on the mic and have a chat, but please don't feel like you have to. But, as soon as I started to read those and everyone else's input, I was like, oh, wow, I want to hear all your stories.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's really the biggest point, the risks, and it is that fear, particularly as you say it. And I think particularly at year 11 and 12, when you've had 10 years of being told you're preparing for this test, you're preparing, if you don't do well, you're going to, you know, drop out of life. it is a scary change to think about that. And I think that's, you know, where this becomes so important, starting
right,
at the early years, to be like, you can take risks, you can try different things, and it'll be okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing, if they know how to learn, then it doesn't matter what setting they're in, they can transfer that. And I think that's evident when that, to me, that was what the big data told me about the work that we did with those students at Harrison that then transitioned through into Gungahlin and got those grade A TARs. And that wasn't just in the maths area, it just happened to be right across the school, and that was the drive around personalising learning for students. So teach them how to learn, they can learn in any space.
Yeah. I like what Kerry said there too, that kids need to believe they can learn.
That's right.
I'd like to add to that the challenge that there are a lot of teachers who need to believe that their students can learn, that the students are able to access the curriculum, especially if you're talking about students that are on the fringe. So we want to make sure that we do also believe that they can learn.
With the comments there around making mistakes, I might just chime in on an activity that something that actually ended up coming out of the space. Again, had no idea that this was going to be the case, but our students, when they would complete a custom task in Mathspace after we'd sort of, you know, done quite a bit of work in a particular topic, we would run a custom task test, and then the students would obviously get really quick data about what they had incorrect. And then we would set up an expert rotation, and we would group the students in groups for whichever question they got correct and set them up at a desk, and they would become the expert in those questions. And then the other students would have an opportunity, or they'd all have an opportunity at some stage, to find the questions that they got incorrect, find their expert others, and go and sit at that table and collaborate with them about the answer to that question. And we worked with the kids on making sure that they never gave the answer, because we always said to them, a great teacher never gives you the answer. They always leave you thinking, and you may feel frustrated, but that's learning. So you know, it was really interesting to listen to the kids actually reiterate that. So that was sort of an activity that we did, but that then also led to them developing blogs. So when they did make an error, and we ended up doing this through their adaptive tasks and everything as well, they would be able to take a screenshot of the question or whatever it was that they got incorrect. You know, they might have been doing an investigative task that wasn't on Mathspace, it might have been just a group thing, but they had to take a photo of that error, and then they had to find a way to solve that problem. So, you know, they could, you know, talk to the teacher, go to the help desk, they could do some more reading in Mathspace, search videos, whatever, talk to their peers, and then solve that problem and then get that problem correct. But then they had to blog and write a story about what their new learning was. And as educators, we learned so much about what they actually understood about how to learn through those blogs. And then they were sharing their handles with each other as well. So then they were commenting on each other's blogs and providing feedback through there. Really powerful stuff. And yeah, kind of interesting, because you can imagine how much time that takes. You know, how many times do you hear teachers, doesn't know which teacher it is, but, you know, we just don't have time, we've got to get through all this stuff. But in actual fact, like, that's where that learning happens, and we need to let that happen.
I'll just move on. We've got a slide here that talks about some specific strategies with regards to learning how to learn. I'm conscious of the time, so we might just focus on the first couple, and then we'll come back if we've got time to talk in some more depth about the others. The first one I'll do here is this was one way at our 11 and 12 school that we opened up the floor to really look at learning how to learn. So we use this idea of a learning brief, which is a one page, so, you know, front and back or just one side, summary of what the week's intentions are. So the goals were clearly listed, and then we split it up into these different various aspects. So there's the theory component, the practical, an investigation, which is a task whereby if they just launch straight into that, you know, they may not have all the skills immediately to do it, but to answer the questions that have to go and demonstrate basically that they had some understanding of the theory and practical as well. Quizzes, we were using, well, they're using Mathspace now. We didn't have Mathspace at the time back then. Mathspace was barely existing when I was setting this up. So we were writing our own digital quizzes using different sort of software, which is a time-consuming part, if only for Mathspace. So, but the reason we set it up this way was because, you know, we had this more flexible space where students were coming, and when they were coming, they were choosing to come to Maths. It wasn't timetabled. And when they chose to come to Maths, they would also choose what they worked on. They would choose which space they were in, and they would choose, oh, today's the day I'm doing theory. I'm going to sit down and do the questions because I've got access to my friends or the teacher. I really just want to nut out this investigation. It's pretty hard, so I'll do some peer work there. So they were having to choose which aspect of that. And we spent a lot of time setting this space up and talking with the kids about how it is to learn and how to identify how the different time of the day, what's happened for them that day, like all of that social, emotional well-being stuff contributes to how ready they are for different types of learning. So yeah, this was one of the examples that I just wanted to show you today about considering something that you could use to open up a little bit, to make it more, it can be self-directed, even in a traditional structure. It's still something you could do if you're in a class and you get to see these kids, you know, 3 or 4 times a week in a high school. You can still do this. They can still turn up and choose whether they're working on the theory or the practical. All of the information's there ready for them. And then they can choose whether they sit at this side of the room where they're working together, or over here where they might be working independently. It's just an option. Cherie has an example too.
So this is a mind map, and we use these to conduct mini action research around whether the students were learning more by accessing the text within Mathspace, the quiz within Mathspace, and then obviously the videos, because we use the learning briefs and things as well. And we wanted to try and work out whether, if they did those in a certain order, were they learning more and then getting, you know, better results. So what we did was, at the beginning of every topic, was they'd use a special, like a certain coloured pen. So in this case, it was a black pen, and Abby they all had to brainstorm everything that they knew about quadrilaterals. And if you just have a quick look there, you can see that she knew how to draw them, and they have 4 sides. And Abby's wasn't one of the high achieving students, and she didn't like mathematics at all when I first started to work with her, when she first came to the high school there at Harrison. And then, of course, the second one was, in this case, was they did the quiz in Mathspace, and they had to add their new learning to that in red. And then in the blue was read through the lesson in Mathspace and add any more learning to that. So what we wanted them to do was to be able to see how they were constructing the learning using, you know, the different things that we were providing for them to access that. What we discovered was that, because what happened was the students were all wanting to go into the quiz first. They were all excited about the Mathspace quiz because they just wanted to do the quiz. And then, of course, we found some of the students were getting a little bit frustrated at different times. And so we knew that they obviously hadn't had any instruction or any other teaching as such. So when we tested this, we discovered that the students, when they accessed they read first the Mathspace documentation from the textbook. They watched a video and added some learning to that, and perhaps attended a masterclass with a teacher, and then did the quiz. They did the maths quiz in a shorter period of time, and they had higher accuracy. And we shared this data with our students as we were going through this process. So this mind mapping was something that stayed with us for every single topic. And the students, you can imagine how sort of deep that some of these mind maps got depending on the students, but it was lovely to watch that grow. Abby was one of the students that I sort of bumped into after she graduated college. Actually, she was working somewhere, and I just went in for dinner, and I think she was working there, and she just said to me, "Oh, Miss Connors, I always felt so smart in your class." and that's just because she was a learner and she was learning how to learn. And of course, because of the way the space was, like Erin was sort of mentioning, they could go off and collaborate and be independent. Harrison was set up in a similar way. There was no competition. It was they were in competition with themselves, and wanting to learn in that space. So
I really love this sort of concept because without being explicit about it, you can easily, after this event, have a conversation about learning, right?
that's right.
Well, how did you learn and what was the benefit of that learning? And then that's a very easy conversation to flow to the broader community. So yeah, it just sort of opens that up, because remembering that the whole idea is that we want to be able to continue to provide opportunities to have conversations to create our community of learning.
Right. And these were the ones that they used to share with their parents, because they found because they experienced it, and it was all in colour. They could, it was quite easy for them to sort of, when the parents say, "What did you do today?" they had something to say.
Oh yeah. Let's just move on to these 3 key areas. So these are, we're sort of in wrap-up zone. We're probably going to run about 5 minutes over, if we can stop talking. Community of learning. These are the 3 key areas. I don't need to go into them here. We've got 3 slides for them. So we really believe that, 3 priority areas for developing this community of learning and I hope you've really got this out of us today, because I've said it a lot, about having conversations, and they need to be conversations about learning. How can you have those conversations? You can do a whole range of things. I'm a fan of invite yourself to another place. It shows that you're keen and you're interested, and people are really not going to close the door on that. They're going to go, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, sure. Come on up." I've talked a little bit about that internal versus external conversations, within, your own classroom, your teaching community, external to the parent community and other schools. Invite teachers over, invite them up, just for a cup of tea. Don't have a meeting. A meeting sort of, I don't know, it's not a good place to start. If you think about it this way, if you were dating and you were going to set up a date and you were looking for a life partner, are you going to set up a meeting? It's going to be something a lot less casual. The relationship you build with these other things, you want to be something that's sustainable. So let's set it up on something that's a little bit more foundational for a relationship to develop. So that's what I mean by that. That's something Cherie thought.
So I think when how do we, I guess, break down that what's happening in high school, what's happening in primary school, what's happening in the workforce conversation when somebody says that next time? How are we going to respond to that? And I know that in the conversations that I've had with Erin, and I mentioned before how, she managed to pose, challenging questions, but questions that just provoked deeper synthesis in me and in my thinking about what I believed. And I guess my question to you, or was for you to think about, is like, how are you going to respond? Because if we let it go, then we're kind of advocating it. And something that Erin used to sort of say to me was, "Tell me more about that." And that would provoke me to go deeper into, well, actually, yeah, well, I think this and I think that. And then in that situation, you always find yourself, I always find myself anyway, thinking, well, this actually isn't right. I need to actually think about what I'm saying. Sorry, Erin, I feel like I've stumbled over that one a bit this time.
No, the point is really that.
Bring me back.
One of the best ways to get in with these learning conversations is to try and open up more when people think differently to you. Like, that's always a point of a place where something good can begin. So if they're thinking something different, or if they make a sweeping statement like, "Oh, but I've got to get them ready for high school," or "What are they doing in the primary school?" We've all sort of, maybe we have all sort of had similar thoughts. Why are my pre-service teachers coming to me this way? Like, challenge yourself, but also challenge others when you hear those sorts of things. You don't need to challenge them directly and say, "Oh, that's rubbish, you shouldn't say that." Just say, "Tell me more," and really unpack that and get to the bottom about what it is, what's making them think that. Like, "Tell me more about that." "Oh, okay." And it gives them the opportunity to really dig deeper, to just explain it in other ways. "Tell me more" also works when you're teaching mathematics. Well, tell me more, explain more. And you really, oh, you looked it up in the back. Okay. So the second point is about collaborating on curriculum. Now, this is another conversation. So you see I'm a fan of conversations, but it's a specific conversation to have. This is another avenue to be able to open the door to schools broader than your own to say, well, what programs are you using over there, primary school that's 2 blocks up the road from me? I'd like to know, like, are you using a textbook, using a digital resource? How do you use it in your classroom? An important question is why? Why have you chosen that? Why was that particular resource chosen? Oh, because it gives us a really great picture of the student in terms of continuous data. Bonus. Oh, because actually, well, you know, it doesn't do stats and probability that well, but the number section is fantastic and we've chosen to focus on that. Like they're good things to know. Why have they chosen those resources? Other things in terms of curriculum, you can ask people, well, hey, I'm about to teach fractions. How do you all teach fractions? Like ask how they're being taught. And that can be a real door opener for a year 7 teacher or a high school to ask of their feeder primaries. Like, how did you teach these foundational concepts? And being able to tie in some of those manipulatives, the fraction calculators or the pattern blocks or number lines or empty rectangles, like being able to bring some of them into your classroom when they're familiar with the primary school students, like they're going to go, oh, I can do this. This is familiar. Or even if they can't do it, they're going to go, oh, I've seen this before. And there's a way in there as well. So obviously it ties in with communication. How about Cherie, talk a little bit about data for us?
So there's the student vision and their own data. In the space that we worked in, the students having access to that live data in Mathspace was really empowering for them because they were then able to start from where they were. And you know that every single student in your group, there's such a massive spread. And so for them to be able to come from what they know and then grow from there and have real-time data coming to them that they can then respond to and learn from and go deeper and deeper into, such a powerful tool. And really impossible to do if we're grading paper sheets, let's face it. We've got the technologies to do this now, and I'm even having this conversation at the moment because I'm in a new setting at the moment. I've only been in there for 12 months. I'm having that conversation at the moment about why are we doing this and all of the students are being delivered the same knowledge at the same time when we have access to these technologies that enable students to be able to just keep growing in their data. So, and that data that informs the next steps for them. So this is ultimate. Like the students are going, well, I've done this and now I need to go here. I mean, there's this element of they don't know what they don't know. And that's where we come in, and that's where our expertise comes in making sure that we are designing learning and designing access for those students to be able to go to an investigative task, complete a quiz, work collaboratively, watch a video of a teacher teaching, attend a masterclass, do some collaborating, and take all of that data to inform their next steps.
I like that. The data that you were collecting in Harrison, like the rich data, the blogs and the portfolios and all that sort of stuff was shared with the community, like with their parents and carers. So that extends that idea of this is how we've been learning and I have been learning and this is where I've learned from my mistakes. Like that, it just extends that out to that next umbrella.
That's right. We used to have the learning exhibitions and the students shared their blogs and were able to share the discussion forums. I mean, a lot of the times I knew that their parents could see the discussion forums at home anyway. And we would pose different questions to the kids. And it could have been about a change in the pedagogy that we were using that was informed by the students and we were getting their feedback on that. Or it could have been, a specific, a big question, big rich question around the math concept that we were covering that week. And of course they had a separate forum where they could engage with each other around their maths and their own sort of problems. So because what happened in the beginning when they had access to this technology was they were expecting responses from us 24/7 because they were all online learning, you know, at 7 o'clock at night, and the discussion forums are going ping, 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 ping. So quickly turn those notifications off and fix that problem. Had a couple of great students that just loved helping the others, you know, obviously born teachers, and so they were in there helping to answer. But yeah, that data there was really powerful, and particularly the blogging data, where the students were telling their stories. And we said to them, you know, it's about writing, I did this and I did that and I thought this, but then when I changed this, or I, you know, spoke to Miss Connors, or I watched this video on Khan Academy, or whichever one. We had this great guy from the UK that we ended up liking. I can't remember his name. He was really great. But we used a lot of his clips. He did a lot of videos teaching. So yeah, lots of different ways. And students just learning from where they're at.
Yeah.
So powerful, so powerful.
So I know we're out of time. We did talk a little bit about, I think we've talked about what we said we'd talk about. So this is our point to just check in and make sure that we did. And this is, you know, where we're going to get our feedback from you, I suppose. What we said we would do would be to discuss common misconceptions about the primary high school experience, show how continuous data across a child's learning journey can remove these boundaries and foster that strong partnership and return the focus to the individual student. If I was going to self-reflect on how I think I've performed on delivering on that, I would say I probably fell short on the actually showing the data, removing the boundaries, but we talked a lot about what is good data and how those and how good data can contribute to communities of learning. So I'm hoping I got there in some way, or in maybe a roundabout way.
We're always open for a Zoom coffee, you know, if you're in the ACT or Victoria, look us up.
Yeah, we're very, very happy if you go away from this and you sort of, if things start percolating in the background. I know you'll get an email from Erin soon. It'll have the link to the video. Use that as an opportunity to say, right, I really want to have a bit of an opportunity to chat with Erin or Cherie, or both. Maybe not both, you won't get a word in. Pick one. And I'm sure we'll jump on Zoom and have a chat. Like, we love meeting teachers who have ideas and thoughts and are passionate about this stuff. So,
and that was one of the key elements in the development of the spaces. You know, I visited schools in Sydney and I spoke with random people that had random titles under their names in emails. You know, please, link and connect and share with us. I'm keen to hear your stories.
Oh, fantastic, Glenn. I'm very glad to hear that.
Me too.
Feel free to pop any questions in the chat, or feel free to speak if you'd like now. Obviously, if you need to go, that's okay too. We're at the end of the session. But yeah, feel free to stay on. I'm just going to chime in with my feedback. I actually was sitting there mulling over myself about how powerful it is for asking for feedback, one, from students in the way you're presenting information to them as well. Because I think obviously in the traditional setting, the standard thing is, oh, this is terrible, you're a terrible teacher. But in hindsight, people remember those amazing teachers that took a lot of time to enhance their learning, as you said. And I thought, what a great idea, even if you were, you know, popping down to a year 6 classroom, what if you took an activity like that mind map and say, hey, this is something I was thinking about. Would this be something that would work in your classroom? What a nice icebreaker, an easy icebreaker that would be as well. Yeah, so that was just something I thought in the ways to sort of connect that as well.
Yeah, I'm glad we've provoked some thinking.
Yes.
Food for thought in the people who've come today. It's fantastic. We do hope that we hear from you again in some form.
Absolutely.
I know there's a lot of very familiar names in there, so I'm hoping we can hear from you in different ways. Everyone in there, everyone that's attended.
David, if your mind is racing here, join the club. It's a great place to be, right?
Hi guys, it's Cassie here. Erin, I think I actually watched one of your presentations at a Mathspace conference years ago. I think you were 3 years into your work at Hawker.
Yep.
And I was so excited by the ideas that you were sharing. And I'm still working for a big space to put all my kids in.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kath. You're still at the same school? You're in different locations now. Are you still looking?
I'm in a different location now. I'm at Hunter School of the Performing Arts, and the kids are amazing.
Beautiful.
And they're really compliant learners. So I think I could get away with almost anything.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We
Erin,
actually...
you think, sorry, Cassie, I was just jumping in. If you have student feedback, it's often from the kids at HSPA. They are very good at their feedback.
Yeah, they'll tell you what's wrong, even when it's not.
No, they have beautiful feedback. They're always very thoughtful in their delivery.
Right. I have organised, helped work towards, we have one big space that can fit 4 classes, 4 teachers with breakout rooms.
Oh, wow.
But once I created it, I could no longer book it because every other school wanted it. If you build it, he will come. Yeah.
Something that happened at Hawker, so our space was up, it was running, it was humming, and the library was empty because students would come to our learning space to do all manner of learning. So we had this massive open space and they could just come in. And of course, if they were doing maths, they'd check in, they'd use their QR code. But if they were doing other subject areas, they'd just come in and sit down with their friends who were doing maths. Like, it was just the learning space.
Yeah.
The library then had to have a rethink because they were no longer seen as the place to go to learn. They were seen as this other place. And so then the library had to transform itself to get people to come back to them to do learning, which, you know, they had to create new spaces. But I love that. I love that we made them think about it because we were stealing all the kids.
That's awesome.
Okay, I think that's everybody. Hey,
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
thanks
I think
everybody.
so. Thanks again.
Hope to see you soon.
Yep. Let's go to WA.
Thanks, ladies. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.